Am I still to create the perfect system?
Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Underrated Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss movies that we feel are underrated, underappreciated, or ones that have just slipped under the radar and passed most people by. We're a collaboration of friends. My name is Ariel Ortiz, and I'm joined, of course, as always, by Alan Torres and Derick McDuff.
Hey,
Hey.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
And today we are going to be talking about, as part of our Summer of Sequels series, TRON Legacy, the sequel to the 1982 cult classic Tron. This film brings back two of the main actors from the first one in the forms of Jeff Bridges and Bruce Littner, as well as add new characters of Garrett Hedlund and Olivia Wilde. With incredible development on the practical effects that the first one was praised for, along with the now very iconic soundtrack by Daft Punk. This film, to me, represents the perfect sequel, but also wrongfully underrated. It has a 51% on Rotten Tomatoes by critics and a 6.8 on IMDb, which it shares with its predecessor. Same score. So, with that, I mean, I think we discussed this movie before. I mean, just in, amongst ourselves and how much we like it. So let's get into it.
yeah, I really do like Tron Legacy, like it's one of those, it feels like a kind of a big swing type movie, even though it is a sequel to, this kind of beloved cult classic. It is just like this big, weird world building movie with all these crazy effects. And man, I'm like, that is something like the effects are incredible. And it does build on the first one through those effects. The first one was revolutionary for its effects, but something that I felt like this one brought to the table that Tron 1 didn't really bring is that it does have a lot of like kind of elements about philosophy and religion and like what does stuff mean, and that the Tron 1 was just kind of like a fun cheesy 80s movie that kind of became a cult hit because it's kind of like, whoa, computers are crazy. And this one, it really took a lot of those core elements and built on them in a way to like kind of make a more interesting story with more compelling characters and a much richer story world. And it is because the last movie we talked about, for the first one for our sequel movie, we talked about Scream, which is a very direct sequel. It's came out like Scream 2. Thank you. Yeah, and this came out. That came out a year after the first Scream, and it was very much just a direct follow up. Where this one is, it's one of those long awaited sequels. So this is kind of the opposite. Like those movies that like Tron is like such a cult hit, and for years and years there's rumors like, oh, there's going to be a sequel. And almost 3 decades later, I think it was 28 years since the release of the first Tron, we finally got a follow up, and it's one of those movies where it's like if you have seen the first Tron, it is very rewarding because there's a lot of things in it, like like stuff like references like, oh, end of line, or like how you see Jeff Bridges' character has evolved. Like his character in the first one maybe kind of not the best dude, and that's kind of reflected in yeah, and him being kind of a villain in this movie. Like he's kind of just like a corporate, like, oh, I gotta get my royalties, and over the years he's kind of like become like a like Zen Buddhist kind of like Big Lebowski-esque figure. And his former self is literally the villain in this. So you do get rewarded for having that knowledge, but it's also a sequel where you can kind of just go in cold. You don't have to have seen the first Tron. You can just go in and watch this movie, and you'll get the gist. You'll understand, like, story beats that happen in that first movie don't really matter. But you the things that do matter are kind of told to you, but not in like a way where it does feel like it's taking anything away from the movie. So it does feel like a great kind of soft reboot type, long gestated sequel, because honestly, like these long, like the when you have a gap this big between sequels, it's really fucking hard to pull off a movie that does feel like it belongs, because a lot of actors might have moved on, or writers, directors. A lot of the writers and directors were new. It was Adam Kitsis or Adam Horowitz and Edward Kitsis, who they did Once Upon a Time. They were writers for Lost, so I obviously have a lot of respect for them. And they kind of respected the classic, and so but a lot of things like this can go wrong, and even if it is an okay movie, the expectations with these films are often so high that it can torpedo a movie. Something like Indiana Jones 4, which came out, I want to say 19 years after, yeah, 19, because the 3 came out when I was like a couple of months before I was born, and then the 4 came out when I was a college freshman. And that's a movie that I feel like is fine, but like there was no way that it was gonna be. It's way worse than the first 3. It's never gonna live up to those expectations, and I think that's what really hurt this movie a lot too. Is that like it is this cult classic, and no matter what you're gonna do, you're never gonna, these people who have been these hardcore Tron fans since the 80s, and all the critics are like it's not the same, and other than like a Mad Max Fury Road, it's really hard to grab both the critics and do well financially. Well, there's another movie we'll be talking about later on this series that did well critically, but a long gestating sequel that did really bad at the box office. And this one did okay at the box office. It made its money back to the point where Tron 3 has been on and off again multiple times throughout over the years. It's back on right now, so that's good. But yeah, really cool, and holy shit, like this movie, like other than maybe Jeff Bridges de-aging in a couple parts, but this was like the first time that was done, it holds up really well. Like all the effects, all the like battles and the light cycles and everything, incredible. Like I was watching it on my TV last night, I was like, wow, this is so crisp and good looking. Just it, like I love it. One of the best effects, like because it's very very effects heavy. Like I think it only had a week or maybe even less of shooting because it was almost all done in post. But holy shit, does it look incredible. And I gotta say, this was also, when I saw it originally in theaters, it is a 3D movie. I'm not always the biggest 3D fan, and it was also in that post Avatar boom of like, let's fucking make everything 3D, because Avatar like made all the money, and they're like, okay, well let's just make all the movies in 3D. And a lot of them didn't need to be in 3D. Like I remember, like the last 2 Harry Potter movies got after they were shot, got converted into 3D. This Pirates of the Caribbean 4 was another one where it just looked god awful in 3D, and there was no reason for it to be in 3D. But this one, you're like, yeah, I get it. This movie should be. It was shot this way. It needs to be made this way, and as cool as it is to, I've watched it a bunch of times, over the years on, my home screen, but like those, because I saw it a couple times in theaters actually, and watching it just on that big screen in 3D was an experience. This is one of those kind of big event movies that you see on the screen in 3D is just kind of like nothing else.
I think for me, I think it captured the same kind of thing that the first one did. I think that it essentially is and that's why even hardcore Tron fans love it so much too, is that like it captured what they were, saw when they saw the first Tron movie, of that high techness and stuff like that. But because we're in a new age, that high techness is brought to another level. And so for me, I mean, I've been like, while I was watching this, I was reading through like, the IMDb reviews and stuff like that. It's just like so many. I don't know where these bombs are coming from, but like the ones that I was like flipping through, it was like so many of 9s, 10s, like just 8s and all this stuff of just beautiful graphics, and not just that, but also the story, and like how much of a deeper story it is especially compared to the first one. The first one is very much like, I would say, like an equivalent of a generic like video game kind of movie. You do get kind of like the little sense of that philosophy with the introduction of the users and the programs, and Tron feeling like like essentially like a Job kind of character of like a complete utter devotion to the users and stuff like that. But then this one kind of takes it into a different span of like kind of like of kind of turning of like, what are the users? Are the users, like gods, these programs, or not, or like, of course they're not. Like, that's what Flynn kind of represents at the end when he talks to Clue, of like, I am not perfect, and that's wrong that I told you to create the perfect world, because the perfect world doesn't exist. Like, there's it's its beauty of the world is in its flaws and stuff like that. And so, like, and then especially seeing, like, the prosperousness of the grid, but all the prosperous is like corrupted in a way, like of everybody wanting, especially with what's his name's character, I always forget his name from Good Omens and Twilight.
Oh, you talk about Michael Sheen.
Michael
Zeus?
Sheen's, yeah, Zeus, like that character
It's
kind of thing.
Zeus eating the
Yeah,
scenery.
oh my gosh. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, I like, as much as Tron, the first Tron was like very much an inspiration to pop culture in general, I feel like this kind of like is actually, like, I don't know if but like, I because I like go to Disneyland and stuff like that, there's like a secret group called well, like, kind of secret group called Mouse for Lifers, and they were created because of this thing at California Adventure called Electronica, that they just became friends because they just
Electronica.
yeah, and they became friends because because that experience of this Electronica, and so it brought them together, and then they created, like, okay, we want to share, like, this community with all these other, like, Disney and Tron and just pop culture buffs, so that kind of like spawned, and it's just like, yeah, like, it's that, I feel like the Tron property in general just represents, like, the true nature of pop culture in a way, of like taking something that, yes, it doesn't, like, at least the first one, yes, it doesn't have, like, the it's not an Oscar worthy movie and stuff, but it has a heart, and I think that that Tron Legacy just, like, makes that heart grow a lot bigger. I mean, just like I was telling, like, just the characters are so well written, and you understand where they're coming from, and there's no, like, BS in their interactions, especially between Kevin Flynn and Sam Flynn. Like, I told you guys, like, in a message yesterday when I was watching, I'm like, Kevin Flynn is essentially what Luke Skywalker should have been in The Last Jedi. He has kind of, like, lost hope in his role in this world and stuff like that, and he's, like, scared. There's a fear in him, but when the time comes and he's, like, challenged by Sam saying, like, this is what we need to do it, this is what's right to fight and stuff like that, he does come to that realization, he does accept it, and he does it for Sam, he does it for the sake, for the for the grid, for the thing that he built. And so for me, I just, like, I love this movie, like, especially rewatching it last night. I was just like, how much I love these characters, and just, immediately connecting with them, like, from the beginning, like, Sam, like, you understand him from the beginning, that, and it was very much a refreshing thing to see that character of Sam not really holding grudges, he's hurt, but he's not, like, acting out on that, he's still a really good person, and he's, like, still, like, he missed his father, but once his father, like, he says, like, I wanted to get back to, and I made a mistake of waiting so long, like, cutting it close for the portal and stuff like that. But he still understands, like, he did want to come back to him. Like, it wasn't like he chose the grid over him and stuff like that, because in his mind, he didn't think that there was, like, he could do both, kind of thing, and stuff, like, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and then also, I think while it wasn't the intention, I think that having Clue is, like, that, doing that kind of de-aging thing kind of added to the whole aspect and of the of the difference between Flynn himself and Clue, of that
Yeah,
artificialness and stuff like that. I think it kind of ended up in the end adding to it. I know while it was
I
unintentional.
I do, yeah, I do, because like in the beginning scene when it's like actual Kevin Flynn back in the past, I'm like, ooh, this is a little rough, like. But then when it's in the digital world, I'm like, okay, like this actually works and makes sense. It's not, it is a little bit uncanny valley, but since he is a digital recreation of him, it actually works in the movie's benefit.
I agree with that. Like I know everybody was just like, "Oh, you got the age and it looks weird and blah blah," blah. And I'm like, "But they're in a fucking digital world, like Digimon. Like who fucking cares? Like they're digital. Like what do you expect someone's gonna look like? Flesh?
It still look better than The Irishman.
I don't know. Yeah, like I always thought like if I were going to be thrown into a computer, I was gonna expect like on characters from like Virtua Fighter and shit from way back in the day, or like Tekken. But like I remember, I know you guys are saying you guys saw a lot of like nines and tens when the movie came out. I heard a lot of complaints, which was shocking to me because I fucking love this movie and all of the digital the grid, pretty
Oh.
much my aesthetic. Outrun and synthwave and vaporwave, all that stuff. So like, I know you guys talk about the characters and the story, but for me, I was like, I just want to live there. Like, I love the neon lights and fucking Daft Punk's at like a bar.
Yeah.
That's perfect living. If I could just live in a digital world where everything's neon and I can go to a fucking club and Daft Punk is there and I can drink, perfect. It's a perfect movie. It's great.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing to say, but other than joking aside, like, yeah, I was really shocked, like that this movie didn't do. It did well. It didn't, like you said, it made its money, but I'm like, dude, how was this not like the next Pirates of the Caribbean? It's
Yeah.
stunning. Like, I know you guys are
It
talking
did,
about
yeah, it did okay, but
characters,
it
but
did underperform expectations. You know.
man, is this movie fucking gorgeous to look at? Like, I know, I know we usually talk about the story and everything like that, but like sometimes, like just like the Akira podcast we did as well, I just fucking love looking at it. Stunning and gorgeous the whole world is, even though it's like dark and neon. I'm like, dude, this is badass. Like, how do you not just like go smoke a fucking bowl and go watch this movie and just sit there and just like when they're doing the races and all that with the motorcycles, the light bikes, and then just like the battles and like even the discs are like almost like lightsabers esque. I'm like, dude, this movie is just to look at. Still shocks me about it, and that's what I feel as well, is that it's underrated as well, and like the electronica thing as well. I went to Disneyland around that time as well, and I was like, why isn't this blowing up, man? We live in
Yeah.
a digital age. Like,
They had like
I'm just so like,
they had the
oh,
actual
go ahead.
Flynn
Sorry.
arcade, which
I
was like
missed
a
that
fucking
so
incredible.
fucking much. That was so cool. Like I remember when I didn't know it was there and I saw it, I was like, "What the fuck? I have to go in here." And it was like, it was so cool. It was like the cool, and now it's like replaced with something else. And I was just so pissed because, God, it was like you were like you were stepping into the movie when you got to be like in Flynn's like, and it's so cool when he goes into that and. Because the beginning of the movie is kind of a slow build up, and it has the '80s music, so it kind of gets you in the vibe, and then boom, you're in the grid, and like Alan, like you said, it is just like this visually just like insanely beautiful world. Like it does that same kind of thing that I love about the big swing movies, where it is just like not movies don't look like this. Not very few movies look like this. Tron has such a great specific aesthetic, and I feel like honestly the aesthetic for this movie has kind of like replaced a lot of people, even the aesthetic for the older Tron. Like people, when you think of Tron, you think of like the look of this movie because it's so sleek and clean and cool looking. And there's that ride. I think it's in Shanghai Disneyland. It's like a Tron roller coaster.
And
And it
it's
looks like
coming to Epcot.
is it? Oh, to Epcot. But it like looks like the
Okay,
fucking coolest thing, and I would
man,
die to
man.
have that at like California Adventure or something, or Disneyland. I really really love the whole aesthetic, and like you said, Daft Punk being like there and doing all the music and stuff, and just it is really just I do have an appreciation for just beautiful movies because like as if movies are visual medium, so like otherwise you
Exactly.
can like read a book or something, like which is great, but if you want to your movie to stand apart, having these cool visuals, and it's not like they're just there for whatever reason, they're there to support the story. Like it all works out really well, and it's a whole package, this movie.
Definitely, dude. I completely agree. Like sometimes a bit of like a CGI kind of like I don't like it. I don't like it in my movies, but when it's done right, I'm like, oh fuck yeah, dude, take me there. Like this movie, CGI wise, was done so well. Like like I said, the light bikes, kind of like whole battles and all that, and like the discs. Like, dude, it's just so cool. Like I'm just like, how did this not capture so many people's imagination? Where you just go, yeah, I want like more. Like I know they made that Tron series was Tron
Which Tron
Uprising.
Uprising.
Uprising, which in my opinion is very underrated as well. It only went 2 seasons and just like had brought back Bruce Bottner, but also Elijah Wood as the main character, and it takes place I think technically after Legacy, and it's actually a really good series.
I thought it was like a before Legacy. I thought it was like a between Tron and Tron
Might
Legacy.
be,
I don't know,
but
I
I
haven't I
know
haven't seen it, but
Tron's like beat up and hurt in that, so I think it might
yeah.
be in between. But before he becomes Wrestler, yeah.
It's something I've kind of always meant to check out, and I've just never gotten around to it. Like now that it's on Disney Plus, I think it's still on Disney Plus. They
It
took off
is,
Legacy for some reason.
yeah.
Okay, but yeah, and
But
and also we should mention, because we talked about how impressive like the visuals are and everything, and the soundtrack. We also got the sound design in this movie is phenomenal. Like just the way like programs will be talking, and some of them sound like a little more electronic or something like that. And even little stuff like there's a Wilhelm scream in this movie, but it's like it sounds very like digitized. It's like it's all these little things like this that it just the sound and like the sounds that things will make when like they turn on, and it'll just it's so cool, and once again very unique, and it does sound like what you like. Oh yeah, if you were in a like computer game program thing and you were like flying around these ships and they were shooting lasers, this is what they would sound like. Really, really well done. Just every technical aspect, not just visually, but as far as sound goes and as far
Yes,
as editing. Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I agree. I agree so much with the editing because, or the sound editing because, like, when they like they take off the discs and then they kind of like brandish it, the same effect as like a lightsaber. Like it goes off, and when they like just activate it, it makes that noise. It's so fucking cool. Like I'm just like, oh, I can believe that's a weapon. Just like a lightsaber, you're like get cut by a disc or a lightsaber. I'm like, no, fuck that. Like it's really badass. That should hear me kind of thing. But also too, kind of going back to the whole story thing. What I really love though, sometimes with sequels, way that sometimes they come out a little too far apart. Like this one. What I really appreciate is when the writers go out of the way to be like, okay, dude, the first one came out back in like the year 156 BC or whatever, but they're able to like kind of start the story in a way where you you understand the world. Like they introduce it where you feel like you're like, I'm okay. I don't think I missed out. Yeah, you can go watch the first one and then watch this one. You're gonna flying kind of weird like the planes or whatever, like the train with the big old kind of like
Kite.
The Solar
bug
Sailor,
like
yeah.
wings. Thank you. And then like big Easter egg, there's a big secret Mickey in the first Tron where they write it. It's right below. It's pretty obvious now with our television, but back then apparently it was hard to see. But yeah, now like with that and then the Tron cycles and the discs, like I feel like they're able to introduce it to new viewers to be like, oh, I get that. Okay, that's a weapon. That's this. That's this. And even with the story where you're like, they were able to just answer a lot of things where like if a new viewer were to come in and they're like, I haven't seen the first one because it came out fucking forever ago, you're kind of still like, oh, I get it. I know what's going on. because I went with a bunch of people the midnight showing, and people were kind of like, "Oh, dude, I haven't seen the first one, so I feel like I'm gonna miss out." And when they walked out, they're like, "Dude, that's awesome! Like, I want to see more. Like, this world's really fucking cool." And like I never heard anyone complain that they were like, "Oh, I feel like I'm missing something." Like that's what something I really appreciate about this film is that even if you show it to somebody who hasn't seen the first one, they're like, "Oh, I get it. I understand it." It's like obviously like you show somebody fucking Friday the 13th, Jason Goes to Manhattan, they're like, "What the fuck is going on?" All I know is like there's a fucking hockey guy killing people. Yeah, it's a horror movie. That's what you got to assume. But with this one, at least it's explained in a way where you're like, I feel caught up. All right, cool. I'm in it. I'm in this. Visuals and fucking Daft Punk themselves really bring you in. Yeah, I'm about it. That's I think that's one of my favorite things about this movie, and what I really think is very underrated is that, like you said with Furiosa, Fury Road,
Furiosa.
Furiosa
Furiosa Road.
Road, because it's Furiosa Road. Come on,
Yeah.
it's essentially her movie, but you turned the movie. But it's like same thing with that. Like you're kind of like, all right, I'm caught up. I feel like I'm good. I don't need to worry about the old one. If I want to go watch the old one, I'll go watch the old one, which I hope inspired people to go watch it. But
I
I
mean,
feel like
that's what
that's
I
something
did.
very
That's what I
different
did.
I
to
didn't. But yeah.
I did my homework. I watched the first one and then I went to go see it. But I'm not gonna lie, I was like, all right, straight looks badass and it has Daft Punk. All right, let me watch the first one. And then I really liked the first one.
Mhm.
I will say Kingdom Hearts got me introduced to Tron
Yeah.
game because you got to visit the grid.
Hmm.
So I was like, oh okay, doing this, and then they're like Daft Punk's in the movie. I was like, all right, I gotta go watch Tron, and then I gotta go watch Tron Legacy. But yeah, with sequels, I mean, this is the whole theme is that I really love when sequels are able to be like, okay, dude, I get it. You might not be able to do the homework, but at least try and help you on the way. And when it's written a certain way, just like this movie was, where there's adventure, there's action, gorgeous visual effects in it for the ride, I love that. Like it's just so much fun. Where I'm like, okay, cool, I'm happy. Like that's what's so shocking to me that I have a massive Tron franchise. But yeah,
Yeah, no, because it does, it does really walk the line really masterfully of like, okay, like you haven't seen the first Tron, you'll still get it, but it does still feel like the first Tron mattered. It's not like okay, like like a Final Destination movie where it's like okay, well everybody who was in the other one they just died between sequels or whatever. Like the Alien movie, like the recent Alien movies are like yeah, the character from the Prometheus she just died off screen somewhere, so it doesn't even matter. So you could just watch this movie, and so that is always kind of like a problem with sequels is like do we make people reliant on the first one, or do we try to give them something new? And this one manages to do both, which is, there are a lot of just kind of like these soft reboots coming back recently. There's like a lot of stuff from the 80s being revived and stuff. Obviously, we're going to get an Indiana Jones 5 coming up. And so it is a hard line to walk. But I do really like when something, instead of just being rebooted and be like, guess what? All those other Halloween movies doesn't matter. Like you watched them, you loved them. Too bad for you. They're gone. This one is like, yeah, it happened. It mattered. You don't have to know it's happened to go in, but you can still enjoy it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm really hoping that because that's what I really loved also about this one is that it continues on the Flynn kind of storyline. This is Sam Flynn, Kevin Flynn's son, and I'm really worried about like they haven't like with whatever developments that have been happening with the third one, they haven't really mentioned like a Flynn in it, So I am really hoping, especially with like kind of like it was open ended enough of a ending and or closed enough for an ending of like okay he's gonna take Cora and like essentially they're gonna live and she has the potential to help the world and stuff. Oops, sorry. But yeah, I mean, but I really do hope that the story kind of continues. But I like, yeah, I guess like have that kind of like you don't need to. I don't know. I mean, I think you should watch this movie beforehand of anything. But yeah, like I do hope that it does tie in if they do it eventually. It does tie into the last two.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like it is a movie where when we've been watching all these sequels, I have like we talked about Scream last time and how I watched the first two Scream movies for this, and I'm probably gonna for all the movies we've got try to watch the prior movies, maybe with one or two exceptions. And I am glad that I did go back and rewatch the first Tron before I watched the new one to kind of talk about this podcast because it does give you a richer experience. I don't, would you guys recommend both Tron movies or?
Yeah, I would recommend the first one just because of how, like, it was a groundbreaking movie of its time. Don't go and watch it thinking that it's going to be, like by any standards of modern day cinema. But, I mean, it is a bit more of a simpler story.
It's kind of like almost like a Star Wars knockoff a little bit, the first one. It's like, what if Star Wars was video games, I feel like.
Maybe because, like, I mean, I don't feel like Flynn in that one is like a Luke Skywalker character. I feel maybe he's a bit more like a Han Solo kind of being brought into the
Yeah.
mix of a Star Wars story. And Tron
Tron is the Luke, and he's the
Luke,
kind
yeah.
of Han Solo, yeah.
Yeah, in the first one. But definitely like I think that there is like a pretty good like basis of a story in that, and where Tron Legacy kind of definitely builds on and just like shoots into the stratosphere of a story. But yeah, the first one is definitely a classic. And just seeing that, like, it's a very much a moment in cinematic history, I think, in my opinion. Yeah.
I would say it's a mixture of both for me because it depends on how you feel as like a movie watcher because casual and you're like, "Ah, I just kind of want to watch it. I have to watch the first one. But if you're kind of like a completionist where you're like, okay, I need to see the first one, go ahead because I won't lie, Tron himself, the character, is kind of in the backseat in this movie. Like he's really not the focal point at all. And even in the original one,
No.
it was about Flynn.
It's very
Like
much an
Tron's
Akira
just
kind
kind
of
of
thing.
there.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's very much that because walked out of the legacy, people were kind of like Flynn was Tron, or they're like, or I thought Sam was Tron, like oh it was Rinsler, and they're like, oh okay, so that's the only gripe I'll say about Legacy is that Tron is definitely in the backseat. I know there's a whole sequence. He has Tron and Clue, and they're building the grid, like they're upgrading it and everything. But I will say you can watch it casually, but if you feel like more, I'd say watch the first one. So it's really up to you. If you're like, I just want to casually watch it, watch Legacy. But if you're like, I kind of want more of the lore, then watch the first one as well, like a twofer.
Yeah, because the first one's good. It doesn't really hold up so much. Like this one has, I felt like aged well over the past 10 years. Tron is like, okay, like this is a cool relic of the past. If you want to kind of see like, oh yeah, like this is where a lot of this stuff came from. Like, this is kind of like, where a lot of like that's kind of like the origins of like Pixar and stuff like that. Like they worked on that movie and just kind of seeing how computer animation like where it's come from and like CG has come from. That it's kind of a cool experience to watch it from that angle. I think for sure.
Yeah, for the more large person, like Tron is the software that like is mentioned. Like it's kind of like like an Akira kind of thing where Tron is mentioned throughout the movie, and that's why it's named Tron. Not so much about the Tron the character, but because like Tron is what he's going to. That's his program that Flynn created, Bruce Botner's character created to kind of like
Alan Brady.
Alan Brady's character, and that's like supposed to like help NCOM and stuff like that, and like it's getting buried because it would cost NCOM money, but that's the whole thing of that.
It's like guys, what if Zelda was a girl?
Oh yeah.
It really is one of those things. Yeah, definitely. I'd say yeah, just both. Fuck it. If this is if we're the summer sequels, just like with Scream 2, the previous episode, watch the first two. This one as well. Watch Tron and then Tron Legacy. Just why not? It's summer. You're gonna have more free time. Fucking make a night out of it. Watch the duology, I guess, of Tron.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, with that, I guess we could wrap things up. We're just saying of definitely recommending this. If you didn't catch that from everything else that we've been talking about, but of course, like always, sorry, give me 1 sec. Like always, we are the Undercast Company. We do have a few other podcasts that we do. I host a podcast called You've Never Seen, which is considered which we discuss movies that are considered a part of cinematic history or pop culture history, and whether it's me or my guests, we one of us has never seen it, and so we discuss the movie after that first viewing of this iconic movie. And then Derick has one called Gateway Episodes, which is finishing up its first season, and that one is pretty kind of similar, where he takes him or his guest watching a episode of television that's considered a gateway episode into that television series, and seeing if they will step through the gateway for that series. So yeah. So with that, I would like to thank everybody, and please hit that subscribe button on your podcasting app to make sure that you are always notified when we post a new episode of the show, and to continue to hear us babble. And we really appreciate if you could leave a rating and review on whichever podcasting app or website you listen to us. It really helps us out, and we'd like to hear what you think about this podcast. And so with that, thanks as always, and thanks for being amazing.
I'll see you guys in another life.
Take it easy, everybody. Thank you.